In the 2020 supply disruptions, the first category of food to disappear from store shelves in most major cities was gone within 4 hours of the initial news cycle hitting. 4 hours. Not days. Not the next morning. 4 hours from announcement to empty aisle. And yet, if you walked into almost any Asian grocery store in the same city on that same afternoon, you would find shelves completely stocked. Normal inventory. No panic. No empty spaces. And right there in those aisles were 15 of the most genuinely useful emergency foods you can own, sitting untouched because most people had never been told to want them. That is the whole idea behind this list. The best emergency food is not just food that lasts a long time and keeps you healthy. It's food the panic-buying crowd never learned to reach for. Food that sits invisible in plain sight while the standard prepper list, rice, canned beans, bottled water, gets cleared out of every major chain within the same 24-hour window. Every single time. I have been quietly building this specific stockpile for several years. Every item on this list costs less than you think, stores longer than you expect, and was fully on shelves the last time I walked into a store. You can find everything on this list for under $200 combined. Some of it you might already have. And by the end of this video, you will know exactly where to get each one, how to store it properly, and why it stays on shelves while everything else disappears. Let's get into it. Number 1. Bouillon cubes. Most preppers hear bouillon cubes and think flavoring. A nice extra. Not essential. That mental category is the mistake. Let me reframe it. Picture yourself 2 weeks into a real emergency. You have rice. You have beans. You have enough calories. Nobody is going hungry. But something quieter is happening. The monotony is building. The same meal every single day for 14 days straight does something to the people around you that is genuinely hard to overstate. It chips away at morale before anyone notices. It erodes patience. It makes calm, cooperative behavior harder to sustain exactly when you need it most. One bouillon cube dropped into that bowl of rice doesn't just make it taste better. It changes how the meal feels. And how a meal feels in a sustained emergency is not a trivial concern. One cube gives you the equivalent of 2 full cups of broth. Almost no weight. Almost no space. And they stay on shelves during shortage events because nobody panic buys bouillon. A contact I've spoken with, who spent close to 2 decades in food distribution logistics, told me there was essentially no shortage event for bouillon cubes during the 2024 supply disruption period. While broth, canned soups, and seasoning blends were getting cleared out, bouillon sat untouched. That invisibility is the strategic advantage. For storage, get the cubes out of cardboard immediately. Cardboard absorbs moisture. Move them into mason jars with a silica gel packet per jar. Stored that way, they will outlast almost everything else in your pantry. One more thing most people overlook. Concentrated sodium and minerals aren't just about flavor. They replace electrolytes. When people are working hard, sweating, and operating under serious stress, electrolyte imbalance becomes a genuine health problem. Military ration developers understood this long ago. There is a reason bouillon has been in field rations for decades. 500 cubes. Under $30. 500 meals transformed. Number 2. Nutritional yeast. I want to be upfront about the reaction most people have when they first hear this name, because I had the same one. It does not sound like survival food. It sounds like something sitting next to supplements nobody can pronounce at a health food store. What changed my mind was someone insisting it tasted like cheese. I threw some on popcorn just to test that claim. The flavor genuinely surprised me. Savory, nutty, rich. Not exactly cheese, but something in that family. Then I looked at what was actually in it. 2 tablespoons give you around 8 grams of complete protein, all 9 essential amino acids your body cannot produce on its own. Roughly equivalent to 1 egg in terms of protein profile. It keeps for up to 2 years without refrigeration or special packaging. Just an airtight container in a cool, dark place. But the bigger story is the nutrient most standard prepper foods completely ignore. Vitamin B12. Nutritional yeast is one of the best plant-based sources of B12 you can find. And B12 is not optional. It plays a direct role in how your nervous system functions, how your body produces red blood cells, and how clearly you can think. In a prolonged emergency where you're eating a restricted diet under sustained stress for weeks, B12 deficiency becomes a real health risk. Most standard prepper foods do almost nothing for your B12 levels. Most people don't realize that gap exists until they're already feeling the effects. I started mixing nutritional yeast into everything during a 5-day power outage. Into rice while it cooked. Stirred into soups. Mixed into whatever was on the plate. My kids, who had been picking at their food by day 3, started eating properly. One of them asked if I had made something different. I had added a tablespoon of yellow flakes. That was it. 5 pounds runs about $40. Almost always fully stocked during shortage events because nobody is shopping for it. Start with a small container this week, and the case for stocking it makes itself. Stay with me, because there's a connection between item 2 and something I'll show you at item 10 that most people in the prepper community. Number 3. Full-fat canned coconut milk. There is a gap in almost every prepper stockpile that almost nobody talks about. Not protein. Not calories. Fat. Your body needs dietary fat for sustained energy production in the cold. Needs it to absorb vitamins A, D, E, and K, all of them essential for hormones and brain function. And most foods at the center of a standard prepper pantry have almost none of it. White rice has basically zero fat. Dried beans have barely any. Most freeze-dried meals strip fat out intentionally because fat shortens shelf life. I understood this in theory until a 4-day winter camping trip made it visceral. Our group was eating solid survival food: rice, beans, dried vegetables. By day 3, everyone was dragging in a way that sleep wasn't fixing. Mentally foggy. Cold in a way that didn't match the actual temperature outside. One person in our group, a serious long-distance hiker, pulled out a can of coconut milk and heated it with the rice. Within an hour, the whole group shifted. Energy came back. The fog lifted. It was the clearest demonstration I have seen of what dietary fat actually does to how a person functions when the body has been running without it. One can contains roughly 50 grams of healthy fat. Shelf stable for up to 5 years. Around $2 a can at Asian grocery stores, sometimes less. Add it to rice and the meal turns creamy, calorie-dense, and far more filling. Stir it into soup and the calorie content rises without increasing volume, meaning the same pot feeds more people more effectively. In a physically demanding or high-stress situation, your body needs more fat than normal. Cortisol production, physical exertion, and cold all push that requirement higher. Canned coconut milk is one of the most practical ways to meet it from a shelf-stable source. 50 cans in my stockpile. Oldest in front, rotated into everyday cooking. Total cost under $100. Number 4. Potato flour. This one I found by accident. A small European specialty grocery store. Bags sitting on a bottom shelf with nobody buying them. I picked one up, had no idea what I was looking at, put it back, looked it up that evening, and went back the next morning and bought everything they had. Potato flour is not potato flakes. Not instant mash. It is real flour made from whole dried potatoes, what regular European households used to get through winters for generations. And there are 3 specific reasons it belongs in a serious stockpile that almost nobody in the prepper space has worked out yet. First, shelf life. In an airtight container, potato flour keeps for up to 10 years. Regular all-purpose wheat flour goes rancid in 6 to 12 months. That is not a small difference. That is a different category entirely. Second, it contains no gluten. In a collapse situation, gluten-free options vanish quickly and become nearly impossible to source afterward. If anyone in your household has celiac disease, a sensitivity, or any health reason to avoid gluten, potato flour stops being a nice option and becomes a necessity. Third, resistant starch. It feeds beneficial gut bacteria and slows digestion in a way that keeps you genuinely full longer. When you are rationing food, that is a practical advantage with real daily impact. During a 3-day power outage, I made flatbreads on a camp stove. Potato flour, water, a pinch of salt. 5 minutes. Hot bread in the middle of an emergency changes how every meal around it feels. It also works as a thickener. 1 tablespoon does the job of 3 tablespoons of cornstarch. A 5-pound bag costs around $8. Move it into a food-grade bucket with a gamma seal lid and add an oxygen absorber. That one step takes it from a good shelf life to an exceptional one. And during shortage events, it sits completely untouched on store shelves. Nobody is buying it. Nobody is thinking about it. That is the advantage it gives you. Number 5. Ghee. I have a jar of ghee in my pantry that has been sitting at room temperature for 4 years. No refrigeration. No special setup. Just on the shelf. I cooked with it last week. Tasted fine. Actually a little better than when I first opened it. Here is why that matters. Ghee is clarified butter cooked long enough for all the water to evaporate and the milk proteins to be removed. What remains is essentially pure butter fat. Without water or proteins present, the biological processes that make ordinary fat spoil simply cannot happen. That is not a marketing claim. That is chemistry. Archaeologists working in India have reportedly found sealed containers of ghee thousands of years old still intact, and Ayurvedic medicine has described aged ghee as medicinal. Meanwhile, most preppers are spending $30 on freeze-dried butter powder with a 2-year shelf life. A quality jar of ghee runs $12 to $15 and doesn't expire in any practical sense. That comparison speaks for itself. A neighbor of mine, a dedicated prepper, went through a 2-week summer power outage. His butter was liquid by day 2 and unusable by day 4. His coconut oil had separated and started smelling off within the first week. Real money spent on supplies that failed at exactly the wrong moment. My ghee sat through 2 weeks of 90+ degree heat without changing at all. I cooked with it every single day. I keep 2 kinds. Standard ghee for everyday cooking, and a cultured ghee with a richer, deeper flavor for when morale is low and food needs to feel worth looking forward to. That second jar earns its place on day 12 of a power outage. Keep it in the original glass jar at room temperature out of direct sunlight. No mylar bags needed. No oxygen absorbers. The product takes care of itself. Before we go any further, I need to tell you something about the next item that I genuinely wish someone had told me 3 years earlier. Number 6. Dried seaweed. Japanese researchers reportedly found dried seaweed in ancient temple storage containers over 1,000 years old, and when tested, the nutritional content was still measurable. Remarkable history. But not the reason it belongs in a stockpile. The real reason is one specific nutrient that is missing from almost every standard prepper food, something most preppers have never once thought to account for. Iodine. And iodine is not optional. It is what your thyroid needs to produce hormones. Your thyroid controls metabolism, energy levels, body temperature regulation, and how clearly you think. In a prolonged emergency with a limited diet and weeks of sustained stress, iodine deficiency becomes a serious health risk. Most stockpiles have absolutely nothing to address it. A prepping friend went through a 2-week power outage with solid supplies by most standards. Around day 8, he started experiencing unusual fatigue, difficulty concentrating, and low energy. When he saw a doctor afterward, nutritional deficiency was part of the picture, and iodine was specifically mentioned. Plenty of calories, plenty of protein, 0 iodine in his entire stockpile. My family was fine because dried seaweed had been part of our regular cooking for months before that event. The variety available at a well-stocked Asian grocery store is broader than most people realize. Nori has a mild flavor and high protein relative to its calories. Wakame is loaded with magnesium, which matters for energy and mood. Dulse has a natural saltiness that can replace some of your cooking salt. My approach is simple. Crumble 1 sheet of nori into rice while it cooks. It dissolves almost completely. What you get is a subtle savory depth that wasn't there before. It doesn't taste like seaweed. It just makes the rice noticeably better. 3 types. A full year's supply for my family. Around $45 total. Takes up almost no space, needs no refrigeration, and stays fully stocked at Asian grocery stores during shortage events when everything else is long gone. Number 7. Chia seeds. When Aztec warriors prepared for long campaigns, chia seeds were not a supplement. They were a primary food source, valuable enough to use as currency because people had seen firsthand what they could do. That history is directly relevant to a modern emergency stockpile. Most people immediately think of omega-3s when they hear chia seeds. 1 teaspoon gives you more omega-3 fatty acids than a full serving of salmon. Unlike fish oil supplements that break down quickly, chia seeds hold that nutritional content for years when stored properly, vacuum-sealed in amber glass jars, stable for up to 5 years. But that is not what changed how I think about them. Chia seeds absorb up to 12 times their own weight in water. When you eat them, they form a gel in your digestive system that slows how fast your stomach empties. The result is that you stay full significantly longer after a meal that includes chia seeds than after the exact same meal without them. I tested this myself. Normal breakfast of rice and beans, nothing added. Hungry again in about 3 hours. Same breakfast the following morning with 1 teaspoon of chia seeds mixed in. Did not feel hungry for close to 7 hours. In an emergency where you're rationing, that is not just comfort. It is math. Stretch the time between meals and you stretch your food supply without anyone going hungry. Researchers studying Aztec long-distance runners found evidence suggesting chia seeds contributed to both hydration management and endurance in intense heat, though the specific study parameters are worth verifying with primary sources. They also contain all 9 essential amino acids, making them a complete protein. For anyone without reliable access to meat, chia seeds fill a meaningful nutritional gap. 0 cooking required. Soak in water for 20 minutes and they form a filling gel ready to eat on its own. Mix into anything. In a situation where fuel is scarce, that practical edge matters. 10 pounds in my stockpile. About $60 total. Complete protein, omega-3 supply, hydration tool, and a reliable way to stretch every meal you add them to. In a lightweight, shelf-stable package that nobody thinks to grab during a shortage. Number 8. Quality instant noodles from Asian markets. This one might make some hardcore preppers roll their eyes. I am completely fine with that. Quality instant noodle blocks from Asian grocery stores belong in a serious emergency stockpile, not the 25-cent domestic ramen from big box stores. The real products, the ones families across Japan, Korea, Taiwan, and Southeast Asia eat as everyday meals, developed over decades by companies whose customers genuinely care about how food tastes. The reason this is on the list is not mainly about nutrition. It is about psychology. And the psychological dimension of long-term emergency eating is something the prepping community seriously underestimates. A few years ago, I ran a 30-day food test, genuinely eating only what I had stored for 30 straight days. By day 10, there were enough calories, nobody in danger. But the atmosphere in the house had shifted. My wife was quiet in a way that felt like exhaustion. My kids were eating because I told them to, not because they wanted to. The repetition was doing something to everyone that went beyond boredom. On day 11, I made instant noodle blocks I had picked up from an Asian market on a whim weeks earlier. The mood in the room shifted immediately. My kids sat up. My wife said it was good. People asked for more. Not amazing food. Just different. It had layers of flavor. It broke the pattern in a way that mattered more than I expected. What separates quality Asian market noodles from cheap domestic versions? The noodles themselves are genuinely better, often wheat or egg-based, with quality varieties providing 8 to 10 grams of protein per serving. The bigger difference is the seasoning. Real spice blends, dried vegetables, mushroom extracts, fermented bases turned into powder. The variety across brands and regions means a 100-block supply produces meaningfully different meals for weeks. The thing that quietly erodes your ability to function in a long emergency is almost never caloric deficit. It is eating identically every day. Something different to eat, even something simple, actively pushes back against that erosion. 100 blocks under $50. Complete meal in 3 minutes, minimal water. And during shortage events, Asian grocery stores are almost never part of the panic buying wave. Here's what I want you to think about as we move into the next section. Items 9 through 12 cover the category I believe is the single biggest blind spot in modern prepper nutrition. And once you see it, you'll wonder how it stayed invisible for so long. Number 9. Textured vegetable protein. Most preppers have never come across this. The people who know it best are serious long-distance hikers and backcountry travelers who have worked out protein-to-weight ratios over multi-week trips. They use it because the numbers are genuinely hard to match with anything else. Textured vegetable protein, TVP, is dehydrated soy protein in small granules or chunks. Light, essentially flavorless when dry, which is useful rather than a problem. 1 pound of dried TVP rehydrates into roughly the equivalent of 3 pounds of ground meat. Properly rehydrated, the texture is close enough to ground beef or turkey that most people cannot identify the difference in a mixed dish. Protein content, around 50 grams per cup. The shelf life puts it in a completely different category from almost any other protein source you can realistically store. In airtight containers with oxygen absorbers, TVP holds its nutritional value for 10 to 15 years. Canned meat runs 3 to 5 years. Freeze-dried meat products are expensive and typically cap out around 10 years. The cost comparison is almost hard to believe. A 1-pound bag is around $6 and gives you the functional equivalent of 3 pounds of ground meat. Freeze-dried ground meat runs $20 to $30 for significantly less. One purchase, 1/10 the cost, longer shelf life. Preparation: soak TVP in hot water or broth for 10 minutes. It absorbs the liquid, expands, and takes on a texture that works in anything calling for ground meat, chili. The flavor comes entirely from whatever liquid you use. Bouillon-enhanced water makes a dramatically better result than plain water, which is one more reason bouillon belongs at the top of this list. 20 pounds in my stockpile. Protein equivalent of 60 pounds of ground meat in a fraction of the space, lasting over a decade, at a fraction of the cost of any comparable alternative. Move it into mylar bags with oxygen absorbers or food-grade buckets with a tight lid, stored cool and dry. Stop. Because what I'm about to tell you about, item 10, might be the most counterintuitive thing in this entire video. Number 10. Miso paste, shelf-stable packets. Almost nobody in the prepper community is talking about miso paste. And that gap is worth understanding, because miso might be the single most micronutrient-dense fermented food you can store in shelf-stable form. Here is what it actually is. Miso is a fermented soybean paste, the foundation of one of the world's oldest culinary traditions, used daily across Japan for over 1,000 years, not just for flavor, but specifically for the health properties associated with its fermented, probiotic-rich profile. Traditional Japanese households stocked it as a staple, not a condiment, because it was understood to support gut health and immune function. Now here is the part that makes it relevant to a modern stockpile. Single-serve foil-wrapped miso packets require no refrigeration and stay viable for 12 to 18 months at room temperature. Bulk miso in a sealed container holds for up to a year at room temperature, longer when refrigerated. This is not the same thing as a tub of fresh miso from the refrigerated section. These are specifically packaged for shelf stability. Why does this matter in an emergency? Your gut microbiome doesn't remain stable under stress. Sustained cortisol production, disrupted sleep, restricted diet variety, all of these actively degrade gut health over weeks. And your gut-brain connection means that gut health under sustained stress has a measurable impact on mood, cognitive function. You feel it before you can name what it is. Miso introduces live beneficial bacteria in a shelf-stable form. It contains a complete amino acid profile. It provides a meaningful B vitamin load. And dissolved in hot water, one packet gives you an electrolyte-rich, probiotic broth in 30 seconds that pairs with TVP for one of the most complete emergency meals on this list. Around $8 for 20 single-serve packets. Roughly $12 per pound for bulk. Available at Asian grocery stores. Never in the panic buying window. One of the most meaningful nutritional additions you can make to a stockpile for a category almost nobody has thought to address. Number 11. Rolled oats stored correctly. Almost everyone who builds a food stockpile includes oats in some form. Almost everyone is doing it in a way that limits the shelf life to around 1 year and leaves a significant nutritional advantage on the table. Here is the specific difference that matters. Most people buy instant oats. Instant oats are pre-cooked, steam-rolled thin, and packaged in cardboard or thin plastic. The pre-cooking process breaks down the fiber structure. The thin rolling increases surface area exposed to oxygen. The cardboard packaging draws moisture. The result is a shelf life of 12 to 18 months before the oils in the oat germ oxidize and the nutritional value degrades. Old-fashioned rolled oats, the thicker, minimally processed version, sealed into mylar bags with oxygen absorbers and stored in a sealed food-grade bucket, achieve a shelf life of 20 to 30 years. Same oat, completely different category. One storage decision separates a 1-year pantry item from a 30-year foundation food. But the nutritional angle that almost no prepper content addresses is beta-glucan. Oats are one of the only grains with significant beta-glucan content, a specific type of soluble fiber with well-documented effects on blood sugar stability. Under chronic stress, stable blood sugar has a measurable impact on decision quality, emotional regulation, and energy consistency. You want your group's blood sugar stable in a sustained emergency. Beta-glucan in your morning oats is one practical way to support that. 50 pounds of old-fashioned rolled oats runs around $40. Roughly 1,800 calories per pound, making oats one of the most calorie-dense storable grains available. Versatile, cook as porridge, add to flatbread dough, mix into soups as a thickener, or eat dry mixed with chia seeds and water as a cold preparation when fuel is limited. One purchase decision, old-fashioned over instant, mylar over cardboard, turns an ordinary pantry item. Number 12. Powdered milk, stored correctly. Most people who think about emergency preparedness have heard of powdered milk. The problem is most people who stock it are storing it wrong, and they will not find out until a real emergency. The mistake is leaving it in the cardboard box it came in. Cardboard draws moisture and allows slow oxidation over time. Powdered milk left in cardboard ends up clumped, discolored, and off-tasting in a way that makes it genuinely hard to use and nutritionally weaker than it should be. What was a 2-year shelf-life food becomes something you're not sure about at 14 months. The fix is straightforward. Buy in bulk. Move it immediately out of cardboard. Seal it into mylar bags with oxygen absorbers. An impulse sealer is a one-time purchase of around $30. Stored that way, powdered milk holds its nutritional value and taste for 15 to 20 years. That is not a small difference. That is a 10x improvement in shelf life from one afternoon of repackaging. The nutritional value is solid. Good source of calcium, protein, vitamins D and B. Versatile in the kitchen, mix with water for drinking or coffee. Use in baking for flatbreads and pancakes. Build a cream soup base. Make a simple fresh cheese if conditions allow. A practical tip worth starting now, begin blending powdered milk with fresh milk in your regular cooking. A 50-50 mix is essentially undetectable in most applications. Do it consistently, and your family adjusts gradually. When you need to rely entirely on the powdered supply, it is not a jarring change. It is just how food tastes at your house. 30 pounds in my stockpile. Around $80 total. Decades of shelf-stable dairy nutrition, with no refrigeration and no special equipment after the initial sealing. When any real emergency hits, fresh dairy disappears within the first few days. Powdered milk, properly stored, is how you maintain access to an entire category of cooking and nutrition. Number 13. Hard candy and glucose tablets. I know. This one surprised you. Hard candy and glucose tablets are the most overlooked items in emergency preparedness, and the gap between their cost and their real-world value in a sustained crisis might be wider than anything else on this list. Let me explain why this is not a joke. Pure glucose has an essentially indefinite shelf life when kept dry. Hard candy, individually wrapped, lasts 1 to 2 years easily and often significantly longer. At $3 to $5 for a full bag, the cost is negligible. But the return on that investment in a real emergency is disproportionate in ways that are easy to underestimate until you are in the situation. Military field rations have included hard candy since World War II, not as a treat, but for 2 specific practical reasons. First, rapid glucose availability during high-exertion physical work. When someone has been working hard for hours, blood sugar drops, decision quality degrades, and physical performance falls off faster than most people expect. Hard candy provides the fastest available glucose correction in a field setting, faster than any other food on this list. Second, morale. This one is harder to quantify and easier to dismiss until you watch it work in real time. In a group under sustained stress, a small piece of candy, something sweet, something that costs nothing and takes up almost no space, creates a moment of normalcy that has an outsized impact on group cohesion and emotional state. It is not about the sugar. It is about the signal. The signal that things are manageable, that someone thought ahead, that there is still something to look forward to. For families with children, the value multiplies significantly. Keeping children calm in high-stress situations is one of the most practically important things you can do for overall group function in a real emergency. And if barter becomes relevant, hard candy has a trade value completely disproportionate to its purchase cost. $3 to $5. Indefinite shelf life. Keep it in a sealed mason jar in a cool, dry place. Number 14. Raw apple cider vinegar. This one sits in the condiment aisle. It never gets panic bought, and it earns its place in a serious stockpile in more ways than most single items on this list. Raw apple cider vinegar, specifically the unfiltered kind, with the cloudy sediment at the bottom, has been used as a preservation and health tool, not as a trend. As a practical resource people kept on hand because it served multiple functions that nothing else could match. The chemistry is straightforward. Apple cider vinegar has a pH of roughly. That acidity is self-preserving, one of the only liquids you can store that actively prevents its own degradation. A gallon of raw ACV lasts effectively indefinitely when kept sealed. And that same acidity extends the edible life of other foods. Practical uses in an emergency that most people have never considered. Add a tablespoon to a bowl of cut vegetables, and they stay fresh and firm significantly longer than without. Use diluted ACV as a basic rinse for produce when clean water is limited. Add a small amount to drinking water for a mild flavor improvement and mild digestive support. Apply diluted to minor cuts and abrasions as a basic antiseptic measure when medical supplies are depleted. Use as a natural cleaner for food prep surfaces. The mother in raw ACV contains acetic acid bacteria, a form of beneficial bacteria relevant to gut health in the same way Miso is. When your gut microbiome is under stress, diverse sources of beneficial bacteria matter. 1 gallon costs around $5. Takes up minimal space. Lasts indefinitely. Functions as a food preservative, a digestive aid, a minor first aid tool, and a cleaning product. Almost nobody in the panic buying crowd is heading to the condiment aisle. And item 15, I almost didn't include it because it sounds almost insultingly simple. But it may be the most foundational thing on this entire list. Number 15. Hard winter wheat berries. Everything else on this list is a layer you build on top of something. This is that something. Hard winter wheat berries are whole, unprocessed wheat kernels, the grain in its most original form before any milling, and the way whole grain stores compared to processed flour is so fundamentally different that they belong in separate conversations entirely. Regular all-purpose flour has a real shelf life of 6 to 12 months before the oils inside oxidize and the flavor degrades. Hard winter wheat berries, sealed in food-grade buckets with oxygen absorbers, hold their quality for 30 years. Some long-term grain storage specialists argue the shelf life is effectively indefinite under the right conditions. The reason is straightforward. When wheat is milled into flour, the oils and fats inside each kernel get exposed to oxygen. Oxidation begins immediately and cannot be reversed. The whole berry, with its outer bran layer intact, acts as a natural seal, protecting everything inside from that process for decades. The nutritional difference is real and compounds over time. When you grind flour fresh from wheat berries right when you need it, you get everything the grain contains: the germ oils, B vitamins, fiber, minerals, all at full potency. Flour sitting in a store bag has been slowly losing those nutrients since the day it was milled. The most common objection is not having a grain mill. A solid hand-crank grain mill costs around $60. One purchase, no electricity required, and it gives you the ability to turn decades of stored whole grain into fresh flour whenever you need it, with no dependence on any outside system. 200 pounds in sealed 5-gallon buckets. Total cost around $70. More than a full year's worth of flour for a family. caloric density of roughly 1,600 calories per pound, one of the most efficient ways to store calories that exists. And it goes well beyond flour. Cook wheat berries whole like a heartier, chewier version of rice. Sprout them over 3 to 4 days for fresh green shoots, loaded with vitamins and enzymes, which matters significantly in winter when there is no fresh produce anywhere. Juice the wheatgrass from sprouted berries for a concentrated nutrient source when your stockpile is otherwise lacking anything green. While other people are competing over flour that will go off before they use it, 200 pounds of wheat berries represents a decade or more of real food security from a single $70 purchase. Here is what I want to leave you with. The prepping community is not doing anything wrong in the basic sense. People are taking it seriously, spending real money, doing real research. The problem is structural. Everyone is drawing from the same sources and building the same list. And that shared list is exactly what disappears first when a real disruption hits. Think about what a shortage actually is at its core. It is not a scarcity of food. It is a scarcity of the specific foods that millions of people have been told, simultaneously, to go buy. The shortage is the overlap. And if your stockpile looks identical to everyone else's, you are sitting inside that overlap. These 15 foods exist outside that pattern. Nutritious, shelf-stable, versatile, and affordable. But the most important thing about them, the thing that runs through every single item on this list, is that they are invisible to the panic-buying crowd. During the last real supply disruption I went through, every single one of these items was still on shelves the day after the standard prepper list had been cleared out of every store I walked into. This is not about hoarding. It is not about getting ahead of other people. It is about thinking independently in a space that has quietly settled into a group mentality. And when a real crisis hits millions of households that all prepped identically at the same time, that group mentality is not a strength. It is where the system breaks. The strongest stockpile is the one that doesn't look exactly like everyone else's, because that overlap is precisely where the shortage appears. Pick whichever of these 15 covers the most obvious gap in what you already have. Start there. Add one item at a time. Build gradually. Rotate regularly. The goal is not a perfect stockpile built in a single afternoon. It is a stockpile that is more capable, more varied, and more resilient than it was last week. That is really all this is about. If you're adding any of these to your stockpile this week, drop a 1 in the comments. I read every one of them, and it genuinely helps me understand what to cover next. And speaking of next week I'm going to walk you through the 5 storage mistakes that silently destroy everything you've built, including 2 of them that almost every serious prepper makes without ever realizing it. One of them involves an item that appears on this very list. You will want to see that before you go shopping. That video is coming. Make sure you are here for it. Stay ready.